the benefits of getting to lead worship is you get to choose which scriptures are included to be read that morning. And I really appreciate the 3-year lectionary cycle because you do get to hear, if you read it, many of the passages, and some of them are very familiar and some of them are, didn't remember that one. So I can never resist including pretty much all the possible lessons to be read. So that's why we have to read this one. The first reading is from the prophet Joel, the 2nd chapter. O children of Zion, be glad and rejoice in the Lord your God, for he has given the early rain for your vindication. He has poured down for you abundant rain. The early and the later rain is before. The threshing floors shall be full of grain, the vats shall overflow with wine and oil. I will repay you for the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the hopper, the destroyer, and the cutter. My great army, which I sent against you. You shall eat in plenty and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God, who has dealt wondrously with you. And my people shall never again be put to shame. You shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I, the Lord, am your God, and there is no other. And my people shall never again be put to shame. Then afterward I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Even on the male and female slaves in those days I will pour out my spirit. I will show portents in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire, and columns of smoke. The sun shall be turned to darkness and moon to blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. Then everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be those who escape, as the Lord has said, and among the survivors shall be those whom the Lord calls. Next reading is from 2 Timothy, 4th chapter. As for me, I am already being poured out as a libation, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. From now on, there is reserved for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. And finally, our gospel reading is from the 18th chapter of Luke. He told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all my income. But the tax collector was standing far off. He would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
So I worry a little bit about standing behind the lectern because it's about the same height as I am. I want to block my voice. So I'll do my best. And I will often start with a disclaimer. I know in the bulletin it says this is a sermon. It's true that it's untitled, or no title is submitted, but I prefer to think of this as reflection or meditation or something like that. Sermon sounds so formal and it's like writing a paper. I didn't write a paper. And there are kind of 2 parts. Part 1 is praying like a Pharisee. So when I read a familiar passage several times, I don't expect to find anything new in the words. And so with this little story that Jesus tells, comparing the Pharisee and the tax collector in their manner of praying. The Pharisee is boastful, confident in his good behavior, his strict adherence to religious rules. The tax collector is humble and cannot say a single word in his own defense, but he begs for God's mercy. And if we're familiar with this story and other stories that Jesus told, we probably aren't surprised by the explanation of who was justified and who wasn't. We've learned through reading these stories and hearing them interpreted that it isn't our own behavior and adherence to rules that brings God's favor on us. We aren't expected to convince God to love us. We aren't capable of convincing God to love us. There is no need to convince God to love us. We are called and encouraged and exhorted to know that God loves us because God is God. All we have to do is open ourselves to accepting that love. Of course, it's also a good idea to act, to live with the fact of that love underpinning all we do. And sometimes I can even do that for 5 minutes at a time. So what was it that I noticed in these that was new in these words, this particular reading? It wasn't the idea that the Pharisee was patting himself on the back for being so righteous, or the disdain that he voiced for the people he considered less than worthy of God's favor. It was these specific words of the Pharisee. God, I thank you that I am not like other people. And then he goes on to name all those other kinds of bad people. I think what the Pharisee didn't get is that he was thanking God for the wrong thing. There's a poetic way of saying that an action or a belief that's good is we sometimes describe it as pleasing in God's sight. And I'm going to dare to say that these words are not pleasing in God's hearing. Over and over again, Jesus demonstrates that God's love is for all. That all of God's creatures, all of us created by God, every single one is loved by God. We don't always live as though we know the truth of that. But that doesn't make it any less true. So, does that make sense that the praying, I thank you that I'm not like him? I thank you that I'm not like them? He's not getting it. But I wonder, how would you rewrite the Pharisee's prayer? Part 2, stepping out of my comfort zone. So the image of a comfort zone has popped up in my mind several times this week. And it just might be because our glorious, shiny autumn weather suddenly turned into another kind of autumn weather. It is a comfort to have a warm, leak-free home where I can listen to the rain and wind beat against the windows. It's a comfort to be able to choose to stay inside. There is absolutely no reason to venture out until there is. But would there be comfort if the weather was always sunny and dry and perfect? We need the rain, especially after a long stretch of drier than normal weather. I heard someone mention the other day that she heard that October rain is the most important. Does anybody know if that's true? Any farmers or people that are close to you? Have you ever heard that before?
No.
Well, I guess whether it's true or not, I'm thankful for that particular challenge to my physical comfort. It would be terrible if we never had rain. So comfort zones can be physical spaces or areas, although they usually aren't quite so small as a room or a dwelling. And I haven't looked up an official definition of the concept. The way I understand a comfort zone, it's a space, whether it's physical or emotional or intellectual, which is familiar. It's mostly predictable, generally unchallenging, where I can safely think and say and believe what suits me. And if I had to use a picture to illustrate this, I would pick a donut. So I'm in the middle, and there's this nice, sweet, soft buffer between me and what's out there. And donuts generally elicit positive reactions and memories. Ah yes, so nice to be floating along, safe and certain. And then we start our journey to the light. The safety and desirability of the comfort zone doesn't look so positive anymore. Journeys rarely occur within the confines of comfort zones. Does any journey worth taking allow us to persist in understanding and experiencing who and what we meet along the way, just from our own predetermined perspective? I don't think so. And the idea of light presents a challenge to my comfort zone. What will be illuminated? What will I see that I've not noticed before, or that I've not looked at before? What will I understand in a new way, because light is shining on it, or because it is the source of the light, because a beacon of light is shining from it? So one of my comfort zone beliefs has been that there is a best way for things to be done. Maybe I've mentioned before that I'm a rule follower. If you tell me that there's a specific order or method to use to accomplish something, I will, usually cheerfully, follow it. So for example, I used to do a lot of sewing, and I always very faithfully followed the pattern instruction sheet step by step. Anyone who's sewing, you know what I mean. They give you that big sheet, and you go to step 1, step 2, step 3, and put the pieces together in a certain way, in a certain order. And you can imagine how astonished I was to learn that not every sewist does this. Yeah. And even more surprising is that the garments created in this radical manner are every bit as wearable. My pieces usually look exactly like the illustration on the pattern envelope. And that more daring approach, it sometimes yields the same result. And sometimes it achieves an even lovelier garment because the person who crafted it added his own special touch. So my preference for doing things the right way, or in other words, as they've always been done, compelled me to take a closer look when I saw a news story about a meal program at the Brayton School. It was in yesterday's newspaper, and if you'd like to look at this, please feel free. In addition to providing breakfast and lunch, the school now offers dinner to children who are enrolled in after-school activities. It sounds like a success so far, with about 150 children taking part, and they hope to expand it to include families. So aren't parents supposed to be responsible for feeding their children? How can this be? I know the school can't call it this, but isn't this a ministry to these children and their families? Busy working parents aren't always able to prepare a healthy meal, and turning to fast food is the only alternative. So these meals provide nutritious food for growing children. Teachers who are working after school hours join in and share a meal with their students. Children need good nutrition if they're to be successful learners. We want children to thrive and have bright futures. And children need caring adults in their lives as role models and mentors. And I'm going to step off script here to mention a couple of other things. I wish I could find this story again, and I'll keep looking. But in the past year or so, I read an article that was written by a young woman, she's an adult now, who as a child and teenager lived in an affluent community, but her parent was not able to provide enough food for her. So there was no way she dared to admit this to her classmates or in her school. And she found herself so hungry every day. And the consequences were just, you think she was acting out. She was tired. She was sleepy. She couldn't pay attention. And it was all because she did not have a healthy meal to eat every day. So being hungry has a very significant effect on the ability of people to learn or do whatever they need to do. And I'll share another story from my life. And I know I sometimes feel funny doing this, but when Pastor Dan invited us to lead worship, part of it is sharing your own faith journey. So some of you may know that my parents met after the Second World War, but both of them were interned in forced labor camps in Germany when they were teenagers. And if you know teenagers, teenagers are hungry. That's all the time. And my dad doesn't talk about it much, but my mom will tell many stories about her experiences. And one that she has told a number of times, and I will never forget this. So she worked in a factory assembling radar or something like that. But the rations were meager. and she was with her mother. So my mom was about 16 or 17, 18 years old when this happened. They would receive a loaf of bread for the week for each person, and then in the morning, before they went to work, they'd get cold potato to eat. My grandmother, my babushka, was really, really good. She divided the loaf of bread into pieces so that every day they had something to eat. And my mom says, you know, as a teenager, she was always hungry. She would have gone and gobbled up all the bread, hers and her mother's, if she had the opportunity. But, and that, you know, it makes an impression on you to hear your mom say that. But an even stronger impression was her telling me when they went to work, they would often see the people who were in charge, the officers, whoever the people that kept them in line, would be eating their breakfast. They'd have soft, fresh bread, eggs, sausage, whatever. My mom said she would salivate. She was so hungry. She said, I could have killed for that food. Hunger is a very important thing to address. So, one more comfort zone challenge. And this circles back to that Pharisee's prayer. Perhaps we don't make the mistake of thanking God that we are not like other people. But I confess that I've been guilty of loving the sinner and hating the sin. After all, we can love someone and at the same time condemn what they're doing and what their behavior is, right? Well, I was caught up short by something I read yesterday. And rather than paraphrasing, I'd like to read these powerful words as they are written by Charles King, who is a graduate of Yale Divinity School, which is my alma mater. And he's also a CEO of Housing Works, an organization dedicated to ending the dual crises of homelessness and AIDS. So he begins the article by introducing himself. I grew up in South Texas, believing homosexuality was a sin worthy of death. It is what my father preached from the pulpit. After years of earnest prayer, asking God to save me from being gay, I finally realized my father was wrong, that God actually made me who I am and loved me for it. That lifted a heavy burden. But having been called to the ministry, I feared that even though God accepted me, that didn't mean that God's people would. So after talking a little bit about his life's journey, he says, I have to wonder, is Christian hate any different from Muslim hate? Is public hate different from private hate? I truly believe we will see an end to AIDS in my lifetime, and I'm committed to that goal. But it will be a hollow victory if we haven't addressed the homophobia, transphobia, sexism, and racism that drive this disease. I am not so naive as to believe we can end these prejudices. We can, however, employ tenacious advocacy to ameliorate the rejection and disfavor that people experience every day. We now have drugs to treat the virus, but only loving kindness can cure the impact of hate. How do we combat that? I do know what doesn't work. You can never fight hate with more hate and expect to win. That strategy makes losers of us all. And yet, it is trite to suggest love is the answer unless you are prepared to talk about what that love means. Too many times I've heard preachers say, hate the sin, love the sinner. I can tell you, it didn't feel very helpful to be the object of that kind of love as a young gay man trying to find his way. So I will not be so hypocritical as to suggest that such an approach toward those who attack us. But if love means embracing recipients of hate without adding our own judgments on them, and if love means creating a force of protection and resilience, and if enough people join, I think we stand a chance at shaming hate and driving it away. In the comfort zone, we might say, be careful what you wish for. As we continue journeying to the light, let's change that to be bold in what you pray for. So we can also proclaim these words from 2 Timothy. We have fought the good fight. We have finished the race. We have kept the faith.